So today we're kind of is a tutorial on HTML on forms. If I should have put this in Piazza, if you have seen HTML including form stuff before, you can leave after about 15 minutes. I'm going to say something that is not in the notes, so you should stay for about 15 minutes or so, but then there's a wide range of knowledge in here I know about HTML. Some of you have done HTML in the past and are very conversant with it and will be bored to tears by the last hour. Some of you have never seen HTML before, and if I don't walk you through it, then things will seem to go too fast in the next couple weeks. So, like I said, I'll tell you when, if you've at some point we're going to get to a hands-on thing where we build a form, and at that point some of you might want to leave. However, before that, there is some stuff about forms that I'm going to talk about, which is cognitive psychology and which is not actually in the notes. So it's good to stick around for that. Okay, so one of the big things that PHP does is it takes so-called form data from a client and processes it in some way and then sends back some information to the client. And we showed you that round trip last time. So for example, Kayak will take in information about your travel between cities, which days you want to leave, and then a back-end database will be used by PHP to find information about flights between two cities on those days, their cost, and display it for you in a nice format. The way that you set up a form in HTML is you use the so-called form markup tag. So you introduce the form in your HTML page with the keyword form, and then there's two attributes associated with it. So these pairs right here are called attributes, and the first one, the method, indicates the way in which information should be sent to the server. So the method indicates the manner in which form data is sent to the server. And there's two different values you could put in here. Post is one and get is the other. So post and get are the two possible ways that form data is sent to the server. Get includes the form data in the URL. Last time I showed you a sample URL where you may remember there was a script name, then a question mark, then a set of key value pairs. Key1 equals value1. I always forget, is it colon? Separates? I think it's colon. Key2. Ampersand, thank you. Ampersand key2 equals value2, ... So that's the way get does it. Post hides the form data. And passes it through, I'll call it a secure, and I'll put it in parentheses, a secure channel. It means that it is not, the data is not visible to prying eyes as it is sent. That's not even true. It could be, I shouldn't say a secure channel. Let's see. Let me take out secure. I'll say through an invisible channel, one that cannot be easily seen. So the URL only includes the name of the script and where to find it, but not the form data. Both have their purposes. You use get when you want your website to be accessible from web crawlers. So you use get, okay, allows site to provide info to web crawlers. Okay, web crawlers are programs like Google that crawl through the web through sites trying to extract information. And you may well want to allow web crawlers to access your site and be able to obtain information. So it's very useful. It also is good if you want to allow users, so allows users to bypass a website, a web page, and engage your site directly, which you may want. There's nothing wrong with that. And it is frequently used when the backend only provides information but is not being modified. So frequently used if backend does not modify files. So get is frequently used if your website is an informational website. Kayak might use it, for example, because it's not changing things. Kayak is not in the business of selling you an airplane ticket. Kayak is simply there to actually crawl through other airplanes or other airlines like United, Delta, US Air, and find flights and display them for your information. Okay, so get is in fact frequently used. Post is the more secure way of handling things because the data can't be sent via a URL. I'm sorry, yes, it's not sent via URL, it's sent through other means. So it's basically used in a number of situations. First of all, it forces a user to communicate with your backend through a web page. So it gives you better control over the portal, the entrance to your backend. Okay? The second thing is that post can handle I shouldn't say arbitrarily big strings, but it can handle much bigger sets of form data than get. So post can handle much larger sets of form data. So get has a limit. Ran into this with Code Assessor, which is the tool I use in CS102. When I initially started using Code Assessor, it did use get rather than post, but at some point it wasn't working for an exam problem one night, and I was really stressed out for over an hour. It just wasn't working. I kept getting internal server errors. And I finally realized that I'd finally entered a program that was so big that it had overflowed it was past the threshold allowed by get, or had exceeded that threshold, and I had to switch to post. As soon as I switched the send method to post, everything was okay. So the message never told me I had overflowed the get threshold, but that's what I had done. So at a certain point, if your form data is too big, you have to use post. So those are the two big. So post is frequently used if the backend modifies files. So anytime you're taking credit card information, payment information, orders, you would typically use post rather than get. Just one second. And one reason you saw last time what I could do with the URL is I could change information in the URL. I might, if I send purchase information via a URL, and let's say for some stupid reason I had the client compute the amount of the purchase, that amount would show up in the URL. Well, if I'm a clever hacker, I change the purchase price in the URL, and obviously I'm going to go bankrupt pretty fast. So post prevents a hacker from doing that. So that's why I want to use post if I'm modifying files on the back end. I can't really get at the data so easily. Just like, let me first get, and then.
In regard to the first one on post, I just wanted to point out that it is possible to send a post request without a web page using curl. So you do need to, like, if they figure out your key pairs, you need to make sure you're still putting your data, because that is something I've ran into.
Right. So the point was that there's still, if you have to be more sophisticated, but you can still actually force posts without going through a website. So no matter what, you always have to check your data on the back end. You can't be 100% certain about it, but it's more likely to force someone to go through your web page. Okay. So. So both ways, it's just post is a bit more secure. That's also why I got rid of the word secure channel, because I realized it wasn't truly secure. Okay, so then the second thing that's in a form is you provide a URL for the script that you want to execute. So it can either be a relative address if the script is in the same directory or in a subdirectory from the directory that has the HTML. So for example, if you're, let's say that you have a directory www home, that's mine, yours would be web home, that has some HTML files like foo.html. And that's the one that contains your form data. And then you have a directory named scripts. And in scripts, you have handler.php. Then you could have in foo.html form blah, 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 action equals scripts handler.php. Usually, yeah, sure. Yeah, handler. Okay, and that would go descend from the current directory, find scripts, and then find handler.php. You could actually also give it a full-on web address like HTTP. I always forget how web addresses are done. That didn't help. You'd think for all the number of times I have to do it. Is it double colons or is it a single colon? I think it's double, isn't it?
It's 2 slashes.
1 colon and 2 slashes?
Yeah.
Like that? Okay. Sorry, I'm not a believer. I'm sure you're right, but it is a colon and 2. As I said, just didn't seem right. Okay, colon and 2 slashes. And then you have to give a full-on web address like web or web.eecs.utk.edu, and then it would be scripts. You wouldn't have to say www.home because this should be scripts, because www.home is assumed in our case, and then handler.php. So you can either give a full web address or a relative address. And when the form is submitted, which we'll see how that's done, that action gets called and the information is sent to the server using whichever technique you asked for. Okay. Now, there are a number of different ways that you can collect information. There's radio buttons, there are checkboxes, there are menus, and there are text, various forms of text boxes. More recently, they've added some additional widgets like sliders. The standards specify things like calendar widgets, color widgets, I believe file widgets, but the browser manufacturers have not been particularly spry, shall we say, about implementing the new widgets. So you can't be particularly sure that they will work, whereas radio buttons, checkboxes, menus, and text boxes are universally implemented by all browsers. So there's times when you use each of them. So radio buttons you use when you want mutually exclusive choices and you only have a few options. Checkboxes you use when you have only a few options and you have multiple non-exclusive choices. So radio buttons should be used when you have a small set of mutually exclusive options. Checkboxes should be used when you have a small set of non-mutually exclusive. So you can have multiple choices. For example, with the pizza toppings last time, you could select multiple options for your pizza for what toppings you wanted. You should use menus when you have a medium-sized set of either mutually or non-mutually exclusive options. And you should use text, some form of a text widget, if you have a large set of options, which is hard to enumerate. Now, the question is, what is small, what is medium, and what is large? And this is where cognitive psychology has a lot to say about it. So, there is something called working memory, which is where you hold items in short-term memory until you figure out whether to discard them or to store them permanently. Okay, working memory. Most adults can hold 7 plus or minus 2 items in working memory. Working memory, turns out, is fascinating in terms of, yes, if you had me in 365, you can also leave now because you've heard this before. So I'll let those of you who have had me in 365 also take off. Okay, so working memory, they're finding out more and more things about it. It is not completely inelastic, but it is hard to increase. In general, the bigger your working memory, the better off in life you are. Okay? It seems to be somewhat well correlated with various measures of aptitude, which perhaps isn't so surprising because the more you can hold in working memory, the better you're able to not have to write things down. Okay, why is this important? It's important because if you have a small set of items that is less than the size of someone's working memory, then with a glance, they can instantly absorb everything. So if I give you 5 radio buttons, you can instantly absorb all that information because you can fit it in working memory. Whereas if I give you 15 items, you will be not able to do that, and you'll be forced to linearly scan the set of items. So if the number of items is less than working memory, so if number of items is less than working memory, then the brain requires order 1 time to process it, essentially. Because it can instantly suck the whole set into its memory. Whereas if the number of items is greater than working memory, you resort to a linear scan, essentially. Okay, then the brain requires order n time. So, what does this essentially mean for back here? It means that small is what can fit in working memory. So, small equals what? Equals the number of items that can fit in working memory. And you are typically safe if that number is roughly 7. I understand that 7 plus or minus 2 means it could be as low as 5, but you don't design to the lowest common denominator. You go more toward the average, which means that if the number of items is 7 or less, you tend to use radio buttons or checkboxes. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. If the number of items is 9 or 10, you may well decide to still use radio buttons or checkboxes because there's a second feature of radio buttons and checkboxes that give them an advantage over menus, and that is they are visible at all times, whereas the items in a menu are hidden. So especially with checkboxes where you need to be able to select multiple items, it is still more efficient to have all the items visible so you can just scan the list and check them than to constantly have to bring up a menu, click it. In general, on a menu, in order to select, you must click and release and then bring up the menu again to select. So even if the number of items is somewhat greater than 7, you still may choose to put them all on the screen. Now that is more likely for checkboxes than for radio buttons. Okay, so I will say that for checkboxes, for the reasons I just outlined, you may go a little bit higher than 7. How much higher? I can't give a hard and fast rule. But for radio buttons, you would probably hold it at 7 and go to a menu otherwise. Okay? So there are interesting things. My dad was a sociologist and psychologist. I find this stuff fascinating. You can do things to stretch working memory with chunking. And that's a big thing as to how how experts function better than novices, is that experts are much better at chunking and taking a variety of things and being able to group them into a single category. And then they just remember categories. So an expert might remember 7 categories. Each of those 7 categories might have 6 or 7 things in it. So the expert really has 50 things quickly at their fingertips, whereas the novice can't do that. The novice isn't familiar with what's in each category, and so they literally have to store everything from one category. That's why experts are many times so much faster than novices, is that experts are good at chunking. So it turns out that being able to chunk data and reduce like 7 items to 1 item or 10 items to 1 item significantly expands in some sense your working memory and allows you to work at a higher level of efficiency. But that's another course. Okay. So what then is a medium-sized set? That's a little harder to get your hands around, because what are probably the biggest menus you have seen? There's probably 2 that you frequently encounter that are fairly big. Countries is one. What's the other one? States. So we know that there's about 50 states, give or take Washington, D.C., and some American territories. And there's a whole bunch of countries I've never bothered to count. But I think that basically those 2 data sets provide a pretty good upper bound on what is medium. So I would say probably anything from about 7 up to about 50 or so is medium. Okay, again, that's not a hard and fast rule, but medium is going to be roughly 8 to about 50 or so. And obviously large becomes anything bigger than 50 or so. So there are certainly things that can be enumerated. Zip codes can be enumerated. There is a discrete number of zip codes. Unfortunately, there are something like 100,000 of them. That's not something that you can really put in a menu. So you would put that into a text box. You would have people enter it using a text box. Social Security numbers are discrete. Unfortunately, there are too many of them to put into a menu. Okay, so that's the working memory part of things. The other thing that I did not really mention here is the reason you put things into menus or radio buttons or checkboxes is to stop errors by users. There is no reason to give a person selecting toppings for your pizza a nice thing like this, and they say, oh wow, toppings, I like cucumbers, those sound good, and I'd like some carrots on them. Well, it turned out we don't offer cucumbers and carrots. So they've erroneously entered information. So when you know what the options are, one of the first principles of good user interface design is stop the user from making errors. You stop the user from making errors by giving them limited sets of choices. You can do that with radial buttons, checkboxes, and menus. You can't do it with text because they can enter anything they darn well please with text. So that's why sliders are also good when they're available, because they stop people from entering invalid numeric data. Okay, calendar widgets are the same way. I cannot tell you how many times I've messed up entering calendar dates, and if I just had a calendar widget, I wouldn't have messed it up. Okay, which is why I actually wish to heck the browser manufacturers would hurry up and start producing these things, because they seem to be pretty slow about it. Okay, so that's the big spiel about when you should use each of these kinds of widgets. So questions about that? Yes. Okay, so the question was, what about autocomplete? So autocomplete is a useful thing for text boxes, and it is useful to try to anticipate what a person is trying to do. So autocomplete, essentially, as you're typing something like BR, it's trying to guess at what are potential completions like Brad, Bradley, Brain, Brassy, or Brass. So what's happening there is typically as you enter each character, I'm actually not 100% certain. I think that, does someone know how autocompletion works? I know they're looking into a dictionary. The question is, I don't know if the browser is looking at a dictionary on the client or if this is going to the server. Right, but that's awfully slow, which is why I'm wondering whether they do it on the server or on. I mean, if you have a dictionary on the client, which most browsers could easily have, you could do it much faster. You think it is? You think it is through Ajax? Okay. Okay, so the consensus seems to be that it is Ajaxing off to a server. Brian, you were going to. But cookies don't, I mean, you need a dictionary, though, to look this amount of information up. So cookies is going to be. Right, I follow you. If it's cached, you would be looking at a cookie list potentially. So it could be doing that too. It really depends on implementation. Right. Okay. So I guess it does depend on what information you have locally cached and what information you have to go off to a server for. But usually, so I think though when you're doing form complete, like when I'm doing form completion and I enter my name, I bet that's local. So I don't, because they come up very quickly with van der Zand, and I don't think that's going off to a server. So I think Scott's right and Brian's right that they're taking advantage of what information is there. So did that kind of answer it or not?
I also kind of want to know, like, is that good to use for a user interface?
So I like auto completion a lot. So I think it is good to use, especially in text boxes. But you want to use someone else's technology. You don't want to roll your own. But auto-completion is not going to help. It can suggest possible completions, but it can't stop the user from entering erroneous data. So auto-completion is a convenience so auto-completion both finishes a thought for you, and auto-completion makes use of what's called recognition memory. So it can be hard to sometimes recall exactly what you want to enter. Like if I'm entering a website, I may forget exactly how it's named. Auto-completion will, by popping up a list of options, I no longer have to recall the exact address. I can use what's called recognition memory, say, oh, I'm trying to get to ESPN. This is the site name for it. So that's why auto-completion is good, because it saves you typing and it uses recognition memory. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so this is now the part where if you have seen HTML before and form data in action, you might want to leave. But if you've never seen how you use tables to create forms, you should stay, because that's important too. So what I'd like you to do is use your computer to, you actually don't have to secure shell into Hydra. You should be able to do this actually on your local machine. So the way that you create a HTML page, if my Emacs would ever come up, maybe, hello? Hello? Huh. Well, Emacs is not responding. Now it's dead. And there we go. Okay. So I would create a temporary file somewhere and name it whatever you want. I'm going to name it foo.h. Don't name it whatever you want. You have to put an HTML suffix on it. And if you load this into a browser will look at the suffix and realize it's a .html file and will interpret it as such. You use what are called markup tags to format information in a HTML file. And so you can type just in a bunch of information like Brad Vanderzanden went to the store. But let's say you wanted to now create a paragraph, okay? He picked up a number of items, including, and now I want an ordered list: 1, a flashlight; 2, a backpack; 3, some food. And let's say you wanted to highlight Brad Vanderzanden and you wanted to italicize backpack. Well, let's just try to first of all display this without any markup. So we just do it like this. Okay? So just enter something that has a bolded list like this and try saving it. And then in your browser, you can type, in file, colon, and then at least this works with a Mac. I think it should work with Windows 2, but I'm not 100% positive. But you can type in the directory that contains that file, which in my case is users bvz temp foo.html. So what I did, I typed file, colon, and now 3 slashes, and then starting from the root, I typed in the path. Does this work as well on Windows machines? Okay. So if you display it, that's not exactly the way I want it displayed. Okay, it flattened it out, and instead of having my nice formatting, it, how do I want to get rid of this stuff? It just flattened it into a single string, so there's no paragraph. These things aren't in a nice list. Certainly it's not italicized. So what I can do is I can use what are called markup tags to control formatting. So to boldface something, I put the content between a tag that starts with B and one that ends with /B. So all markup tags are enclosed in a less than greater than sign, and all markup tags end with a / and then the corresponding tag. So that tells it where the content begins and ends. So if I now were to save it and reload my browser, Brad van der Zanden is now bold-faced. If you forget the B, it's not catastrophic. The browser does what it can with it, which in this case, it is going to boldface everything. And you pretty quickly can figure out where you went wrong in your markup. In this case, I forgot a /. If you want something to be in a paragraph, new paragraph, you use the P. That starts a new paragraph. Okay, so here I might also want a paragraph. If you want an ordered list, you use the OL for ordered list, and then each item on the ordered list is started with an LI for line item. Now, and then you terminate the list with OL. Now you notice that I did not terminate my P, nor did I terminate my line item. So browsers are smart enough to figure this out. Technically, every opening markup should be terminated as well. So technically, after each line item, I should have a closing line item. And after the paragraph, I should have a closing paragraph. Now, early on, the developers of HTML realized that this paragraph thing is kind of nonsensical because there's no real content between the P and the ending P. Actually, sorry, the ending P would occur right here. I was wrong. That wasn't what I wanted. So if I now save it, oh, and I want it to italicize backpack, so I can use an I. Okay, so if I now do it, it is actually formatted the way I wanted it to. So the browser interprets this markup, and it does it using what are called cascading style sheets. So cascading style sheets, or style sheets for short, with each markup tag, they indicate how you want content in that tag to be displayed. And there's all kinds of information that you can provide, such as font size, font name, font face, such as bold, italic. You can say that stuff is left aligned. You can say it's right aligned. With these line items, you can control whether it's a number or a letter. Typically, the style sheet is separate, and you simply import it. I'm not going to go into it because this isn't that kind of course. You also will sometimes see the style attribute used, and you might see something like that, in which case it is specifying right there that the type of character I want used for my line items is, and I got it wrong naturally, list type, list style type. Sure, I'm still wrong. Nope, that was right. So you've got to come up with the correct, see now it's ABC. Typically you don't specify the style in your document. You typically specify it separately in a style sheet. The idea is that the content is specified separately from the style. So here, I guess what I should say is HTML these days is meant to indicate the structure. So HTML should indicate structure of your document. And CSS indicates style. In which content is rendered. Okay, now there are certain tags like B and I that predate the separation between HTML and CSS, and so they essentially still have style embedded in them. When you say B, you expect it to be boldface. When you say I, you expect it to be italicized. But in general, the styling information is put in a separate file. Okay? Now, there are also certain tags that draw things like the horizontal tag, and this is where I was going to say that you don't, in this case, have any content for what's called a horizontal rule. So if I were to save this and reload over here, you now see a line coming across the bottom, which is called a horizontal rule. Well, there's no content in a horizontal rule, so they introduced a shortcut where you could put the backslash at the end of the tag, and that indicates that this is both the beginning and closing of the tag. Hey, another common one, especially in forms, is BR for line break. It forces a line break without actually creating a new paragraph. Okay? Now, so that pretty much gives you the start of what you need for forms, because you normally see forms laid out and there's spacing between them. So you use either a P for paragraph or a BR with a slash to put form elements on different lines. You also sometimes see them nicely formatted, and the way they accomplish it might be to lay them out as a list, and then there's a way to suppress the printing of the 1, 2, 3, which we won't go into. Now, there are you'll also see in forms typically that stuff is laid out in columns. So if I go to Kayak, boy, that's fast. Come on. I don't want hotels. Flights. It's not lining them up in columns like I want. Do what? LOG? No. There we go. Okay, well, this is kind of still not. Well, there we go. Facebook and Google are in columns, and so is Flex Month over here is one column, and over here we have the login information. So you often see things lined up in columns and forms. Now, there's sophisticated ways of doing it, and then there's the I don't have time to learn CSS table way of doing things, okay, which works often just as well. So if let's say I want to say that I picked up a number of items, including that, and he still had the following items on his shopping list. And I'll say that it includes, let's see, I picked up some food, so I'll say a tent. And I'll also say I need a sleeping bag. So I'm going camping, it would appear. So let's say I want this to show up side by side in 2 columns. What I can do is I can put it into what's called a table. So a table starts with the table element and ends with table. Then you can create rows with TR for table row. So in this case, I'm going to create a 1-row table that has 2 columns. 1 column for my list of things I've picked up and 1 for my shopping list. And finally, I create my table cells, my individual table entries with TD for table data. So I'm going to put TD around that. I'm going to get rid of that for a moment. I'm going to put TD around my second list. Whoops, but not do that. Okay, so I've created a table, then a single row. In that row, I have 2 table cells. Okay, and if I bring it up, you can see that it produced it in 2 side-by-side columns. You'll also notice that this second column is not top aligned. That's something that you could control using a style sheet. We won't worry about that. Okay? Now you might say, but what is column 1 and what is column 2? Well, I can put in table headers. So I'll put in a first row with a table header that is items bought, and a second one that's a table header shopping list. So now I have 2 rows. The first row is a header row, and the TH simply means that I'm telling the browser that it is a header for the table, and it will render those items differently, which in this case is it boldfaces them. Okay, so you can put tables within tables. And so within a table cell, I could actually create a second table. So I could put table in there and start recursively doing it. I'm not going to do so, but I could. Okay, so you can recursively use tables to get the appropriate layout for your form. Again, professional designers don't do it that way. They use cascading style sheets, but I typically lay out my pages using tables because I just don't want to fight it out with cascading style sheets. It can take a while to get stuff to appear the way you want. So questions about this? You see, for those of you who have not seen HTML before, are there questions about how you get stuff formatted? This gives you the rudimentary set of tools you'll need for the homework. Okay, so what I want you to do now, first think about it, is I want you to create a form that has the following elements. So pretend we're designing a form for a visa site. Okay, and what we want are the first, middle, and last name. I want the person's eye color, which can be gray, blue, green, or brown. I want the color of their hair, which can be blonde, brown, red, or black. I want the set of activities they intend to perform. So this is a visa application. So So I want the set of activities they plan to do while they're there. They may work, they may do some diplomatic work, they may be a student, they may have some pleasure, they may be visiting family. So this is not mutually exclusive. They might do multiple activities, and they should enter their height, which is going to be in feet and inches. So there should be one for height, there should be one for feet and one for inches. And then there should be something a box that asks, what will you be doing? And you need to type in what you will be doing. So take a moment and think about which form element you would use for each of these pieces of information. The first name, the middle name, the last name, the eyes, the hair, the activities, the height, and what you'll be doing. Okay, so Ben, what will we use for first, middle, and last, presumably? 3 text boxes, because there's just so many possible names, there's no way to predict, we can't enumerate it. It's a very large set of possibilities. Okay, even if I limited the middle name to a middle initial, I would not make the middle initial a menu. It's just, in this case, inconsistent. When you're going for comparable pieces of information, you try to keep a consistent set of widgets. So even if you could limit the middle name to 26 letters, I would still go with a text box there because first and last name are also text boxes. Okay, Sharon, eyes, what would I use? Your choices are, pardon? Radio buttons, yes. Why? That's right, because it's a small set, less than or equal to 7, and they're mutually exclusive. You only get to choose one. Okay, hair color. Let's say read. What would you use for hair color? Pardon? Radio buttons, and why is that? Right, it's mutually exclusive, less than 7. Brian, what about activities? Check boxes, because? And? Well, and there's a small set. Yep, okay. This one's a little more difficult and subjective. If you're going to do feet and inches, someone want to offer up an idea? Tyler. So Tyler's saying menu, right? Or are you saying? So the way it's normally done is with a menu. Here's the reason I suspect. Inches, there's 12 of them. That's a little too much to put into radio buttons. And it would take up a lot of space. Now height is much more restricted. Okay, you could probably pretty much get away with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But you try to keep consistency. If you're collecting, these are 2 related pieces of information. Since you're collecting inches using a menu, you might as well collect height using a menu as well. You keep it consistent. Okay? So other choices, you could have said radio buttons, but there's just too many radio buttons for inches and they hog too much visual space. Guess that's the other thing I didn't say is the other restriction on radio buttons and checkboxes, they all appear on the screen, so they take up important screen space, especially on mobile devices. So you can't have them hogging space. If you had sliders, then you might well decide to use sliders to collect the feet and inches, but without sliders being widely available, we'd probably go with height. And then what will you be doing? This is a little bit of a tricky one. You had to read your today's notes to know what the correct answer is, because it might be a lot. They might have to type several lines. text area. There's a difference between what's called a text box and a text area. A text box allows you to collect a single line of information. A text area allows you to collect multiple lines of information. So you'd probably use a text area for that. Okay, what I would like you to do now is to actually try to create a form. And let's just start by creating the boxes for first, middle, and last name. And just to make it a little bit interesting, let's just start with 3 boxes. Okay, so I want you to create boxes for first, middle, and last name. So in your form.html, go ahead and create those 3 text boxes. You may have to look at today's notes. Okay, which tells you how to create those widgets. So if you go down far enough, you'll see there's a place where there's something for text boxes. Pardon? You're right. But those are also new, I believe. Interesting. Okay, so here's my first go at it. Okay, so I just typed in, so you have to label them. Without labeling them, it's no good. And you can see that they actually don't take any label inside of them. You actually start and end them with the terminating character. You also see that I have an attribute in there called name. That has nothing to do with the fact that this refers to first, middle, and last names. This is going to be the name of the key that is sent to the backend script. So when your selection for first name is sent, the key will be first. And name is what tells the browser what keyword to give to this value. So whatever is entered for first, it will be called first when it's sent to the server. If I put first name here, first name would be used. So with text elements, with all your form elements, the name attribute specifies the key that will be used with that attribute when it's sent to the server. Now, you may notice a couple things. First of all, it's probably not right to have the same length box for first, middle, and last, right? So you can control the length of them. We're not going to go into that, but we're not going to do that. But if you look at the description there, you can see that you can control the size of each box with the size attribute. You can provide an initial value for the box if you want. And you can control the maximum number of characters that are typed into the box. So the size is how wide it appears. And unfortunately, while the number that you provide for size is supposed to be the width of the box in terms of characters, it never seems to be exactly that wide. Like if I say size for first name equals 10, by the way, you should also put your attribute values in double quotes, always. Put your attribute values in double quotes. But here I'm going to say the size is 10. If I go over here and load it up, it does decrease it, but if I type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, I really got 12 characters into that box. So the size doesn't quite match up with what you might think. Now, in part, that's because, does anyone know why it wouldn't match up perfectly? Ben? Because you're not using what's called a monospaced font. So monospaced font, every character has the same width, but typically you're using a variable width font, so it has to choose an average width. Okay, it happens that numbers aren't very wide. If I go for W, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it was exactly 10. So it was probably going with the maximum width. In fact, I didn't quite get, if you look over here, the first W is cut off. I only got 9.5 W's into that window. So it's basing it, I would presume it's basing it off the maximum width of any character in the font. Okay. This name, you might not like the way that's there. There are different things you could do with it. One is you could put a legend around it. So you could say, group it as a field set. So this is where I'm trying to collect the name. So there's a way to say that that things are grouped, and you can do that with a field set. Okay, and then you need to put in a legend. I need to make sure that I get this right. Yep, you just put a legend in there. Needed to make sure it wasn't an attribute. So you say legend, name, legend. And if you bring this one up now, oops. You can see it's now been organized so that there's a box around them. So that can help organize visually your items in a form so that things that are related, the eye visually sees them as being grouped together. Now, it is annoying that it goes all the way across the browser page, but hey, that's life. Okay, you can try to do certain things with cascading style sheets to fix that, but that's life. Okay, now try to do the eyes. So try to create the radial buttons for the eyes. I really dislike drop down. Right, so you're worried about saving space, but radial buttons are so much faster in terms of person efficiency. Right. Right, I agree. Well, you have to be careful. So your issue is they consume screen space, so you just have to select the most important things for screen space. I mean, when you do Word, right, it's very helpful to have things like justification. Those are radial buttons, glorified radial buttons. So it is very helpful to have certain things. I don't want to have to go up and choose centering from a menu. That pisses me off no end. And you can actually turn off this ribbon, and then you don't have to see it. So. Okay, so here is my set for eyes, and you'll notice that they are laid out horizontally. Typically, it's, I like it. I know someone else said they liked it too. I typically like radial buttons laid out horizontally. I think it looks nicer that way. I had to put the name of the group at the beginning. In this case, I chose not to put a field set around it because that would be kind of annoying. And you'll notice that I gave all three buttons the same name. That tells the browser that these are part of a related group. And then I gave them different values. And depending on which one I've selected, that value will be sent with I back to the browser. And notice I put a paragraph here because I wanted there to be some nice separation. If I don't, it just moves it up a little and there's not as much separation. If I wanted to, for some reason, put spaces between them, I could have put paragraph in front of each of them, and then they would have been shown vertically. that's kind of putting a lot of space. So if I wanted less space, I could instead go for just line breaks. And now they're much more tightly packed. So probably for your homework assignments, if you want to lay stuff out vertically, I would typically use line breaks rather than using paragraph because it keeps the spacing tighter. Yes, Anna?
I don't know if you care, but I can set the field set, but view style equals what you can set it.
Okay. So, yep, I knew there was something that did it. Anna was saying if you set style equals width 60, I'm guessing. Yep. But you'll notice that in that case, how middle got shoved up on top of it. So you have to then, where it gets tricky is that depending on the resolution of the screen, it may or may not show up properly. So, whoops, darn it. So the thing is, mine is like 1,000 pixels wide, but if it's a mobile device where it's only 50 pixels wide, it could still go off the end of the screen. So sometimes it's better to leave that information off because then the browser can set it for you automatically. So it depends on how much control you're looking for. But yes, so Adam just mentioned it also accepts percentages. So I could say, I believe 75%. Although I'm not sure field set is, it did work on that case. It's always a question as to whether percents work or not. They don't always work as I expect. They're working with field sets. Okay, at any rate, you should now know enough to do the homework assignment. I'm going to let you read over the rest of the stuff on forms because it's not hard to understand, okay? It's just learning which attributes to use, when to use them, and doing it on the homework assignment will be enough. I believe this homework assignment, I have to check. One of the homework assignments asks you to do some nice visual layout. You can use tables to do some layout because it's not always right to just have it be a vertical column. You like to sometimes have it be more compact and use your screen space efficiently. Like if I just went everything vertical here, just a sec, I'll go with making that vertical and that vertical. If you make everything on a form vertical, you waste a lot of space. See, all this space out here is just wasted. Whoops, not anymore. But all that space is wasted. So that's why you often go to columns, is you're trying to maximize the use of space in a form. Okay, so have at it. On Tuesday, we're going to start talking about how this information gets bundled up and sent to the back end so that the PHP script can deal with the information that's entered by the user. Okay, and have fun with the homework assignment.